On the grounds of the Catholic University of America in Washington, Ethiopian religious manuscripts are coming to life.
Imagine a manuscript hidden in the mountains of Ethiopia for over 1,000 years, quietly watched over by devoted monks. Now, a resurrection passage from this ancient text has been translated, and it may change how we understand the story of Jesus. High in the mountains of Ethiopia, in monasteries isolated from the modern world, monks have been quietly preserving ancient manuscripts for over 1,000 years. Among these sacred texts is a resurrection passage that has rarely been seen outside these walls. Recently, it was translated into modern languages, revealing words and teachings that have been hidden for generations. Stick with us as we unravel this extraordinary discovery, explore its meaning, and see why a text preserved for centuries is now capturing global attention. The quiet kingdom of manuscripts, in the shadows of towering mountains and steep gorges in northern Ethiopia, there's a sacred tradition that few people outside the country truly understand. For centuries, monks have lived in remote monasteries, writing, copying, and preserving ancient manuscripts in Ge'ez, a liturgical language used by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. These texts are spiritual treasures, each page a thread connecting believers to a past almost untouched by the wider world. These manuscripts consist of translations of the Bible known in the West, and also of works unique to Ethiopian tradition. The Orthodox canon of Ethiopia is broad. It contains texts considered sacred here that are not familiar in other Christian traditions. These manuscripts are remarkable because of their age, with some being over 1,000 years old, and because of the careful way they have been preserved. Many were stored in sealed compartments or wrapped in cloth and leather, and they were rarely handled except during religious ceremonies. This careful protection helped ensure that the text survived through centuries, remaining intact for future generations to study and understand. The environment around these monasteries, high altitude, dry stone, and isolation, helped preserve these writings when others in wetter climates faded into dust. This combination of devotion and geography made Ethiopia a living archive of early Christian thought. So, when news broke that a resurrection passage, long hidden in one of these manuscripts, was finally translated into English and other languages, it wasn't just another archaeological headline. For scholars, believers, and curious observers alike, this was a moment unlike any other. What is the Ethiopian canon? When we think of the Bible in the Western world, we often think of the familiar 66 books in Protestant editions or the slightly larger sets in Catholic Bibles. Ethiopia's library is different. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church recognizes 81 distinct books in its canon, a number far larger than most Christian traditions. This extended canon includes texts like Enoch and Jubilees, which are familiar to specialists but rarely known to everyday believers outside Ethiopia. Some books included in the Ethiopian Bible are still not fully available in English translation because they have been guarded inside monasteries for so long. This means that during centuries when Roman, Greek, Latin, and later European scholars debated which books were canonical, Ethiopian Christianity continued its own path. It preserved a version of Scripture that absorbed influences from Jewish tradition, early church teachings, and local theology, all written in Ge'ez, an ancient Ethiopian language. So, when we talk about a newly translated resurrection passage, we're not talking about a completely new gospel in the sensational sense. We're talking about a portion of a text long recognized within Ethiopia that has, until recently, largely remained unknown or unread by the global community. Scholars emphasize that these texts give insight into early founding Christian diversity, how believers in different regions understood faith and scripture. Far from being heretical or dangerous, they expand our view of early Christian theology and practice. The manuscript at the heart of the story. The resurrection passage, causing all the excitement, comes from a manuscript long preserved by Ethiopian monks. According to reports, this text was kept deep within the library of a monastery in the highlands, away from outside eyes. For centuries, groups of scribes copied and recopied sacred texts on parchment made from animal skins, using painstaking calligraphy and ink mixed from local materials. This tradition ties back to Ethiopia's oldest manuscripts, like the Garima Gospels, believed to date as far back as the 5th or 6th century. The monks who guarded these texts saw their work as a spiritual duty, not academic showmanship. They dedicated themselves to preserving what they believed were authentic Christian teachings as passed down through generations. The resurrection passage was not lost or hidden by monks in secrecy. Rather, it remained within the exclusive world of Ethiopian liturgical life, only now being translated into global languages for the first time. This passage is significant because it does not contradict the Bible used by millions today. Instead, it provides additional perspective on how early Ethiopian believers understood the resurrection and how their interpretation of these events developed over many generations. The text shows the ways in which their faith and practices were influenced by local traditions, cultural context, and centuries of careful reflection. It allows us to see a version of early Christian thought that was preserved independently, offering insight into the diversity of belief and understanding in the ancient world. What the passage says. So, what does the resurrection passage actually contain? Reportedly, the passage includes dialogue attributed to Jesus after Parampiksha, his resurrection that isn't found in the canonical Gospels used in Western churches. Rather than focusing solely on the dramatic moment of rising from the dead, this text emphasizes a lingering period where Jesus is portrayed as teaching, comforting, and clarifying his message to his closest followers. Scholars caution against calling this a contradiction to the canonical accounts. Instead, it reflects a different emphasis, one that may have been preserved because the Ethiopian tradition treated certain teachings with particular reverence. It's important to note that the existence of diverse early Christian writings is well known in academic circles. Texts like the Gospel of Thomas or the Apocalypse of Peter were known in fragmentary form in other traditions, but preserved more fully in Ethiopian collections. So, the revelation isn't that the resurrection happened differently, it's that a version of what came next was preserved in a community that was comparatively isolated from theological debates elsewhere. The translation. Why now? For centuries, Ethiopia's scriptural treasures were studied only by those within the tradition or by a small group of international scholars who gained access. But in recent years, the push to digitize, preserve, and translate these works has accelerated. High-resolution photography, spectral imaging technology, and collaboration between Ethiopian authorities and global experts have made it possible to decipher pages that once seemed illegible. The monks worked closely with linguistic scholars who are experts in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia. Together, they carefully studied each line, phrase, and symbol to ensure that the meaning was accurately preserved in modern languages. This process requires extreme attention to detail, as even small errors can change the interpretation of a passage. Translating these texts is not a simple task and often involves years of a focused effort, sometimes taking decades to complete due to the complexity of the language, the condition of the manuscripts, and the historical context that must be understood. The results of this work create a connection between Ethiopia's long-preserved Christian tradition and the wider world, allowing scholars, students, and interested readers to engage with texts that were previously inaccessible. The resurrection passage is among the first of many manuscripts being carefully translated and introduced to a global audience, providing a glimpse into a version of early Christianity that has been preserved in relative isolation. The significance lies not only in the content of the text, but in the fact that such careful preservation and translation have been made possible after centuries, allowing these voices from the past to be heard once again. Why this passage matters. Why has this translation sparked such intense discussion? First, it's rare. Most manuscripts contain part or all of the traditional Gospels and are similar to what religious scholars already know. But a passage that appears to expand on the post-resurrection narrative is unusual because it highlights theological nuances that were left out of later mainstream editions. Second, it serves as a reminder that early Christianity was far more diverse than many churchgoers realize. There wasn't a single unified version of events in the first few centuries. Different regions preserved different traditions. Third, for Ethiopians themselves, this text is not new. It has been part of their liturgical and spiritual landscape for generations. But now, the wider world is finally beginning to hear it. That doesn't mean the world's oldest stories are being rewritten. It means a new voice from the past is finally being heard more clearly. What scholars are saying, experts urge caution against sensational headlines. Many scholars point out that variations in ancient manuscripts are not inherently threatening to mainstream Christian faith. They are windows into how early communities understood Scripture. Some academics welcome this kind of discovery because it gives us a more complete picture of how Christianity spread and evolved in different regions. The passage itself doesn't necessarily overthrow doctrinal foundations. Instead, it enriches context, similar to how the Dead Sea Scrolls enhanced understanding of Judaism around the time of Jesus without invalidating known texts. What this translation does challenge is the assumption that the biblical story is a single, monolithic narrative that was identical everywhere, from the 1st century onward. In truth, early Christian communities, like the one in Ethiopia, had their own ways of understanding and expressing belief. Rumors, reactions, and speculations. Once the translated passage became publicly available online, the response from audiences was intense and varied. Social media platforms quickly filled with comments, debates, and speculation as people shared their interpretations of the text. Some viewers claimed that the passage destroys Christianity as we know it, while others suggested it revealed a secret period in Jesus' life that had been hidden from the world. The speed and scale of these reactions demonstrate how quickly ancient discoveries can be amplified in the digital age. It is important to understand that much of the speculation was based on misunderstanding or exaggeration. Scholars and experts emphasize that this text does not contradict or disprove any foundational aspects of Christian belief. The value of the passage lies in its historical and cultural significance, offering insight into how early Ethiopian communities reflected on the resurrection and preserved their traditions over centuries. The passage should be approached as a historical document rather than as a source for sensational claims about faith or doctrine. Despite the caution of experts, the passage quickly became a topic for speculation and dramatic interpretation. Some influencers and online commentators added music, dramatic visuals, and exaggerated claims, portraying the discovery as a world-shaking revelation. These reactions highlight the public's fascination with secrets and mysteries, even when the real story is grounded in careful scholarship. At its core, the manuscript remains a remarkable piece of historical evidence, providing a window into early Christian thought and Ethiopian tradition, and it invites curiosity without needing to be sensationalized. How this changes our view of early Christianity. If there's one thing this translation truly changes, it's perspective. For centuries, the narrative of Christianity's earliest days has been shaped by texts preserved in Europe and the Mediterranean world. Ethiopia's Christian tradition, however, developed somewhat independently, preserving texts and interpretations that elsewhere faded or were never widely known. The translation of this resurrection passage does not change the core events described in the Gospels, but it offers a deeper understanding of how early believers in Ethiopia and surrounding regions reflected on those events. It shows that they engaged with the resurrection not only as a historical moment, but also as a period of teaching, guidance, and spiritual reflection. The text reveals the ways in which these early communities interpreted the meaning of the resurrection, emphasizing lessons, insights, and practices that were particularly meaningful to their tradition. This passage highlights Ethiopian Christianity as a distinctive and independent tradition within the broader history of early Christian thought. It demonstrates that Ethiopian communities preserved interpretations, teachings, and texts that were valued locally and carefully maintained over centuries. Rather than being simply a regional offshoot, Ethiopian Christianity acted as a living archive of ancient Christian ideas, offering perspectives and reflections that complement what is known from other early Christian sources. These manuscripts help scholars and readers alike appreciate the diversity of early Christian thought and the ways in which it was practiced and transmitted across different cultures. Instead of a singular story, we now see multiple echoes, each offering a different shade of meaning and emphasis. The monks behind the manuscript. The monks who translated this passage have spent their lives dedicated to the careful preservation of sacred texts. Their work is motivated by devotion and a commitment to protecting the spiritual heritage of their community. They approach these manuscripts with great care, understanding that each page carries the weight of centuries of faith, study, and tradition. For these monks, the act of translating and preserving the text is not about attracting attention or stirring debate. Their primary goal is to make sure that the voices of the past, which have survived through generations of careful copying and safeguarding, remain accessible for future generations. Every word, every symbol, and every line is treated with respect because it represents a connection to the early believers who first recorded these teachings. By translating these manuscripts, the monks create a bridge between the ancient world and the modern reader. They allow people today to glimpse the thoughts, prayers, and spiritual reflections of those who lived centuries ago. Each manuscript tells a story not only of faith, but also of the discipline and dedication required to preserve knowledge through time. The process demands patience, attention to detail, and a deep sense of reverence. Translating ancient texts is a meticulous task, often requiring years of study to understand the language, context, and meaning behind every phrase. The monk's work is a demonstration of quiet perseverance and respect for history, rather than a pursuit of publicity or sensational headlines. Through their efforts, these texts are no longer confined to the monasteries where they have been safeguarded for centuries. They become accessible to scholars, historians, and anyone interested in the richness of early Christian tradition. The monks ensure that the wisdom and teachings contained in these manuscripts continue to inform, inspire, and educate, connecting the modern world with a long lineage of faith and devotion. What this teaches about culture and faith. This discovery goes beyond matters of religion and highlights the importance of cultural heritage and the need to pay attention to voices that have often been overlooked in history. By exploring texts from traditions outside the ones we are most familiar with, we gain insight into the ways different communities understood the world, recorded their beliefs, and expressed their spirituality. Ethiopia has preserved manuscripts that offer a unique perspective on early Christian thought, capturing teachings and practices that were valued in this region for centuries. These texts allow us to see the variety and depth of human belief across time and place, showing that spiritual life has taken many forms depending on the culture and context in which it developed. Studying these manuscripts helps us understand that history and faith are not limited to a single region or a single interpretation. Instead, they are shaped by the experiences and perspectives of many communities, each adding its own voice to the story. These ancient works act as connections to the past, helping us learn from the knowledge and traditions that have been carefully preserved. They allow modern readers to engage with ideas and practices that might otherwise have been lost, offering a richer and more complete understanding of human history. The bigger picture. Why this matters. What makes this story so compelling goes beyond the ancient text itself and reaches into the deeper significance it holds for history and faith. This passage is a bridge between centuries, a voice from the past speaking across time to the present, offering insights into beliefs, traditions, and interpretations that have remained hidden for generations. We are living in an era where modern technology allows us to uncover fragments of history once thought lost forever. High-resolution imaging, advanced linguistic analysis, and international collaboration have made it possible to read and understand manuscripts that were previously sealed away in darkness, protected by the hands of devoted caretakers. The importance of this discovery extends far beyond a single page or passage. It reveals how human culture and spirituality have been preserved, how knowledge has traveled through time, and how communities like the Ethiopian monasteries safeguarded their understanding of sacred events for centuries. By studying these texts, we gain a more complete picture of humanity's past, one that is layered, intricate, and diverse. It reminds us that history is not uniform. It contains multiple voices and perspectives, each contributing to a fuller understanding of our collective story. This manuscript is a window into a rich tapestry of faith, tradition, and human experience that continues to inspire and challenge us today. Ethiopian Christianity invites us to widen our gaze, to let go of narrow definitions, and to appreciate the many ways people have understood faith across space and time. The translation of this resurrection passage reminds us that history is larger and more complex than we often realize. It shows how communities like the Ethiopian monasteries preserved their faith, thought, and culture for centuries, offering perspectives that expand our understanding of early Christianity. This discovery connects the modern world to voices from the past, showing that devotion, scholarship, and careful preservation can reveal stories we might otherwise never know. It invites us to reflect on the diversity of belief, the richness of human tradition, and the ways in which ancient texts continue to speak to us today. What do you think this newly revealed passage tells us about early Christian history? Share your thoughts in the comments below.